Welcome, everybody, colleagues. I'm excited to be here with you talking about dirty books and hot stories and the people who write them. And Angie helped me come up with some really good questions for you guys. My wife, Angie Williamz, also a BSB author. And I like the last one so much, I have to start with it because we have to make sure we get to it. And it's kind of me asking for advice as well. And the question is, and whoever wants to answer first can, have any of your parents or siblings read a sex scene you've written? And if so, how were you able to erase their memory? I need to know. How about Deb? You want to go first?
Sure. I don't know that I would erase their memories. None of my family have read any of my books except for my niece, and one of my nephews have read my fantasy series. They never said anything about, I think they're pretty open. So they never said anything about it. But my middle sister surprised me one day by saying, and I'm very close to my two sisters, surprised me one day by saying that she had listened to an audiobook that was lesbian. She didn't know it when she bought it. She bought it because she really liked the title and it sounded sexy. And then she started listening to it and she realized that it was women loving women. And she said she hesitated and wasn't sure she wanted to listen to it or not, but she kept listening. She said, I had a really good story and it was interesting and it was sexy. And she said, I really liked it. And I said, well, what was the name of the book? And she said, The Sex Therapist Next Door. And I said, by Meghan O'Brien. And she said, yeah, I think that's right. And I said, I know Meghan. And so then I said, well, if you've read Meghan, you can read my books. And so I gave her some codes. Yeah, I gave her some codes to listen to because she listens rather than read. She multitasks a lot. The codes to listen to my books, and so now she listens to the few that I have out in audio. She listens to my books and she loves them.
That's awesome. Well, I softened her up and kind of got a little horrifyingness out of it. And then, yeah, it's like, okay, well, if I get through that, nothing's gonna faze me. That's wonderful. Anybody else want to take a shot at that one? Do your families read your books?
My mother read my first book.
And
it's called Shots Fired. And it wasn't an erotic romance. It was just, I don't know. Anyway, she declared it as trash and wouldn't read any more of my books. So I'm like, no, you're right. You're not reading any more of my books if you think that's trash.
Oh yeah, I don't even want to imagine. My mom might have read my books. I don't know. I told her when I was in my 20s, when Infinite Loop was first published, if you ever read this, just don't tell me. You can, it's your business. I'm not going to stop you. You want to be proud of your kid. But yeah, we'll never speak of it. And now I'm 43 and we still have never spoken of it. So Renee or Brit?
Yeah, sure. My sister-in-law read my first one and she didn't say anything about the sex scenes. All she said was, I'm not sure I liked the ending. I was like, okay, well, it's supposed to be a happily ever after. And she says, yeah, but how they had kids, I just didn't like that. Okay.
Yeah, at least it wasn't, yeah. So
but I think she's read 3 or 4 since then. So I haven't quizzed her and we don't talk about it. So I don't know.
Yes, yeah. I like that policy. How about you, Brit?
I have told my parents repeatedly that they are not allowed to read my books. And my mom doesn't read anyway. She's German, so she reads her little German romances. They're little paperbacks and they're just sweet romance. There's no heat in it. It's just like maybe they kiss and that's it. And so my mom's like, I don't understand why you won't let me read your books. I have had children. I know what sex is. And I'm like, you don't know what lesbian sex is. So you get to read it. So I have told, and my sister backed me up. She read Jolt, my first book. And she's like, yeah, I can't do this. So she's told my parents, they can't read my books either. So we have an agreement in my family. They can support me. They just can't read my books.
Yep. Well, I think it's more about, of course, we know our parents know what sex is, but our parents don't necessarily know how we think about sex and what we
Right.
want to write about, and that's the really awkward part, isn't it? All right, so just more of a, I guess, writing type question for you guys. How, and I assume we've all kind of written the more hot end of the spectrum as well as the more sweet or romantic end of the spectrum. How do you guys feel that like sex scenes are different between like an erotic romance or just like a contemporary romance? And you know, is one easier for you to incorporate? You know, is it easier to kind of be able to go fully erotic, or do you enjoy not having to necessarily make the focus about sex? We can start with you, Brit, since we ended with you last time in your
Oh, okay. I there's a definite difference. I mean, with writing erotica, I go obviously outside my lines of comfort, using certain words, bringing sex toys into the equation. It's normally not stuff you find in sweet romance. And so I have to, even though I still use certain words in romance, because I kind of have heated romance, you know, I tend to tone it down a little bit and I make it sweeter and more romantic. Whereas erotica is more just, you know, it's raw. At least that's how I take it. It's more raw and people aren't offended with what you're saying, how you're saying it, what's actually happening on the page. Because in truth, you know, life is both. Life is both the sweet romance and the raw sex. And so I find that I enjoy writing both. But I'm a little, since I'm kind of new to erotica, I'm not quite sure how far I can push it or if I've gone too far. So I don't know. I like them both.
Yeah, good answer. Who wants to go next? MJ?
Sure. I much prefer writing erotic romance to sweet romance. I don't know that I've written a sweet romance. I guess I can think about that. But I like the erotic because I like Chris said, like Britt said, you can push the limits. You can bring more into it. It's more of an adventure. Sex is an adventure in erotic romance, whereas in a sweet romance, sex is kind of like the goal, you know, where we want to get and then live happily ever after.
Mhm.
But in erotic, you can have all kinds of fun on your way to finding that happily ever after.
Very well put. Yeah, I agree. What do you think, Renee?
I think erotic sex is edgier.
Mhm.
You can push those boundaries as far as you want, as far as you're comfortable putting on the page. And hopefully nobody's offended, because if you pick up an erotic book, that's what you're looking for.
Hopefully.
That's what you want to read. As far as writing it, if I have the right mindset, I find both pleasurable to write. I definitely have to have a certain space, though, internally to write erotica rather than the sweeter romance, because it's all about pushing comfort zones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I do need to prepare that that's the kind of book that I'm writing. Not that it can't have sweet scenes in it also, or toned down scenes, but if I write the book and there's only sweet scenes, not only am I going to be disappointed, but my readers are going to be disappointed. So I try to have that going into it.
Yeah. How about you, Deb?
I think the thing that decides for me whether it's erotic or sweet are really the characters, because some characters, I think in a romance, I think your characters are just essential to building the romance. They are the romance, and some characters are edgier than others. Like the first one I think that I wrote that was probably pretty edgy, that wasn't a short story, was Every Second Counts, and I went further in the sex scenes. I went further with those characters, because one of the characters, Mark Ryder, was no relation to Brit Ryder. was an edgy character and very physical and very sexual, and so it was really natural in the story for her to be, and her love interest was Bridget Leroy, who Bridget was an artist and was very oriented towards, the body and physique. She did a lot of portraits and whatever you call the artists that paint nude people. Yeah. But she was really into the beauty of the human body, and so it was natural for them to be more erotic than other characters, and I think that makes some of the difference in some of the books. Some of my sweeter romances, those characters just didn't have that same edginess that would demand that kind of sex between them. Short stories are different. You write a short story to fit the theme of whatever book you're writing for. And if I was writing for a book of erotic stories, then I would set out to develop characters that were erotic.
Makes perfect sense to me. That's definitely a dividing line in my books. What kind of sex are these characters going to have? And some people just aren't going to have the edgy sex. Everybody kind of talked about pushing boundaries, which I think goes really well to the next question. I'm curious, have any of you ever been asked by your editors or publisher to tone something down, like a specific scene, a specific line act, whatever that may be? Or have you found that so far you have not tried to push it beyond where that comfort level seems to be for people? And full disclosure, I am asking because I was asked to tone down a bit of nipple slapping in The Night Off. So and that was maybe the first time I think that it was ever that might be a little too far. And so, yeah, I'm curious, am I the only one who ever gets that close to the edge sometimes? Yeah, anybody can speak up if they have experience with this, or no, just me.
Yeah. Shelley's pretty. She corrects my grammar, and if she ever asks me, she's never asked me to tone anything down. There was a scene one time in the fantasy trilogy that I wrote that she said, this just doesn't move the plot forward. And it wasn't a sex scene between the main characters, it was between some secondary characters. And she was right. It really didn't have anything to do with the sex they were having. It had more to do with the fact that it was sort of a tangent I got off on. Mm-hmm. And but no, I've never been asked to. I've been asked by some
book. It was going to be The Night Off. I mean, I definitely questioned myself a couple times in that book.
Yeah, I got asked by some friends once. The one friend that I still have left over from high school very shyly asked me, how do you know about those things to write about them? I said, are you asking if I've done everything that's in a book? And I said, no, I read a lot. I said, I read a lot.
I do remember that in Not Guilty, after my main characters kind of started a relationship, Ashley took out a couple scenes, 2 scenes, where my character actually had sex with other people. And she's like, well, this is an erotica romance and you don't want to bring more people into the equation, especially after you developed a relationship. So she did take out sex scenes, but not necessarily because they pushed the boundaries, just maybe.
Yeah. It wasn't the right
cheating, no beating.
Romance.
Right.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen. I was too far along in the book for a rather risque, maybe I should try to forget this person kind of scene.
Oh yeah.
And the romance was already kind of blooming, so that's a no. That's a no. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, well, there are definitely lots of rules to these things. And actually that really goes nicely with one of the questions that have been submitted as far as Deb's comments, just how do you know about this stuff? think it was Deb, or I can't remember if it was Deb or MJ. Authors speak often about the research they do for their books. Any tips for going about doing the sex research? Asks Sandhart. Anyone want to start?
Don't go down the rabbit hole, man. It's a rabbit hole once you get started.
That is true.
The most fun I ever looked up was like sex toys in the 1850s. And it just, yeah, needless to say, I was amused, but didn't get a lot written that day.
I'm so sorry. I have to interject really quickly. We just moved to a new VPN at work, so when I connect to my work computer, I have to connect to the work network. And so there's new software on my home computer that is for my work connection. And I forgot to disconnect it one day. And we were looking about things we could maybe do in San Francisco. And I, of course, went almost immediately to the Antique Vibrator Museum page, and then got a nice little nasty note from my work saying this content is blocked. And I'm just thinking, oh, great. now I let that work administrator knows I'm going looking at the Antique Vibrator Museum. But yeah, sorry, go on. Anyone else have gone down any interesting rabbit holes for sex research?
There's yeah, I got down the BDSM rabbit hole recently, and I'm kind of still stuck in there. Which will make for fodder for the next book, or down the road. But it's been fun and interesting and enlightening. Who knew?
Yeah. Yep.
Fetishes, they're a thing.
Indeed they are. And the internet will tell you about every single one of them, it seems.
Yes, gladly.
So it sounds like most of the research is online, which makes sense, and is the case for me usually as well. Does anybody have any good, I was going to go and, I certainly considered when I went to the Folsom Street Fair one year, and granted that is a very heavily gay male event, but it was, yeah. That's an education, right? That's some research, one way or the other. So I don't know if anybody's ventured into real life research like that, but good stories were mostly just from the comfort of your own computer.
I don't know that I would admit if I did it personally, to be honest.
Yeah. Wow, I would think you were a rock star. You should admit it. All right, well, we'll move on. And this is a good question because it's something I always think about now that I've written so many sex scenes. How do you all keep your sex scenes fresh and new and not repetitive or cheesy? That is also a question from a reader, Joni. Let's start with you, Brit.
Every character you develop or that comes to you is different. And I think that depending on their personality, as you're building their personality, they're just going to have different kind of sex. They're just going to bring something different. They might be, strong bottoms or tops, and I don't know what's going to happen until the sex happens. And then I'm like, oh, I'm surprised that they ended up being a total top. I wasn't expecting it. So I think every character is different, and keeping the sex fresh comes with each character because it's a different person. So I don't struggle writing sex scenes. I have probably 12 books or 13 books or something under my belt, and I enjoy writing sex, and I still enjoy writing sex, and keeping it fresh just means, introducing new characters to people.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Renee?
Well, I'm only 7 books in with Hot Days, Heated Nights. And it's different every time. And the characters bring something interesting, not only out of the bedroom, but into the bedroom. And it's up to them to decide what's hot for them and what's not. I don't fight them on it. I really don't. I let them go at it. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that's even a little hot for me, which takes a lot. But if it's a good scene, I leave it.
I've been there. This might be too hot for me even. How about you, Deb?
I think Brit hit it on the head when she said the characters, because as a writer, I want to put the reader in the character's head. And so hopefully they're in the character's head, and so they experience each scene as that character. and so it would be different, just like it'd be different for each different person, you know. And I don't think is the only time that I felt that my sex scenes were repetitive was when I collected all of my short stories in one book and writing passion, and then I realized that I have one thing that I tend to have in a lot of my stories, and after I had to go back and redo the first read through of all those short stories collected together, I felt like I needed to apologize to my editor because she had to read all that sex, all of that sex, but it made me a little more cognizant of, even though most readers wouldn't recognize that because you don't usually collect all your sex scenes in one place.
Mhm.
You know, they're in each individual book. So I don't think if you bring the emotions with the sex, which I think we do, is the point as romance writers, even if it's erotic romance, you bring feelings between the two main characters. You don't, it's still different.
Yeah.
So,
Do you have
think,
any?
MJ, you're frowning.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you have any-
Frowning? I don't mean to be
Very
frowning.
serious and thoughtful.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just agree with what they said, that yeah, it's all character based. Each character has its own wants, needs, desires, kinks, and just go with them.
Yeah. All right. And here's an interesting question I've also thought a lot about from a reader. Aren't you a little concerned about making going down a bit normal and not being concerned about STDs? I think that the discussion about how much to depict safe sex in erotic romance or concerns about STDs, etc., is definitely something that I've been asked about, thought about the entire time I've been writing. And it's not always easy to straddle. You know, I don't know if anybody's ever used a dental dam in real life. It's not sexy. It's not. I'm sorry. There's really, really no way to make that very, I mean, it's a lot more awkward. It's something extra to, you know, kind of have your characters doing that's just not inherently, you know, poetically sexy in a sort of, you know, literary way, let's just say. And it can be very hard to like depict every aspect of those things, but you want to maybe skirt reality sometimes, of course, because you want to be responsible. How do you all feel about that? Have you depicted safe sex in your stories or conversations about safe sex, or have you felt like that's too hard to integrate into certain stories / scenes just because of who the characters are and just the nature of what's going on in the story?
I'll start if that's okay. Hopefully all of my characters are intelligent women who have off-page either discussed it or know the status of the partner they're going to sleep with. I don't feel it's necessary to be in the book. What I do feel is necessary is some form of consent. That's my main goal, is for the partners to check in with each other occasionally, or ask if a certain kind of sex is okay with them, like if using a strap-on or oral sex or what have you. To me, I don't broach the subject, not on purpose, just because I don't feel it has a place in the page. I guess if a character felt strongly enough that they brought it up, then I would address it. But so far, they haven't.
I think that's very fair answer. Does anybody else want to weigh in?
I'll weigh in. Oh, sorry, MJ.
That's right.
I do have safe sex, sort of ish, in Shameless and Not Guilty, just for the sake of having safe sex. But I think it can be done off the page. The book I'm writing now is a romance, and my character's on a TV show, and she talks about you know, she asks for like, she's having a conversation with the hostess and she's like, I don't know why you can't answer this. I've been, you know, I've taken all these tests. I've been tested for STDs. I've been, you know, so I go through the whole list. So I do it in dialogue, but for the most part, I just, you know, it's kind of like going to the bathroom. You don't have to write it on the page. We all know this happens. You know, women have their periods. We don't always write about it. I think there are just some things that it's okay not to talk about. I mean, or else we'd have to bring everything in. And I think off the page is fine. We're all mature people. We can understand, like what Renee said about, you know, just assume and know that our characters are safe and clean, and unless the storyline is different. But yeah, I mean, it's important, but at the same time, we can't write everything in every book or else it would just ruin the mood.
MJ, I know you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, in Score, a book, one of my earlier books, I had the main couple, one of them was a player and the other one was just in love with the player kind of thing. And they slept together occasionally. And the one who was not the player took the player in and made her get dental dams for that reason, because she didn't trust her. But I never depicted anybody using it, but I did take them in and have them purchase it for that reason.
How about you, Deb?
Until I read a story by another author about dental dams, it never occurred to me, and I've never put it in any of my books. I can't think of anything less romantic. I think the whole thing that we like to write in our books about the lesbian who scores frequently one night stands is just that's more of a rarity than it really happens.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that safe sex is paramount in most lesbians' minds, unless they are seeing somebody who's bisexual or polyamorous. You know, I mean, there's other things besides STDs you could be concerned with, you know, with women, you know, like things that you're certainly not going to put in a romance book, like yeast infections or you know, things like that occur naturally for other reasons than sex, you know, that you would still want to be alerted to, but we don't write those in our books either. I mean, I just don't. I think it's kind of natural to. I don't see any problem with bringing up using condoms with sex toys because that's pretty clean way to you know.
And that's something I've written many times, and I've also had people question me about many times because they think it's very strange. They don't understand why I would say that. But for me, it's because that's a hygienic way to keep your toys clean. You know, and those little opportunities to educate are great when they come up, but it really can interfere with the lyrical flow of a story if you're trying to be too educational all the way, well, you know, all along. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I was on a panel once with another author who said something about washing your hands after sex, like jumping up, you know, from bed and running to the bathroom and washing your hands, and I thought, why would you? I wouldn't.
Yeah,
I don't mind waking up the next morning with the smell of her on my hands or my cheeks. I mean, if I'm willing to put her in my mouth, I'm not going to be. I'm not going to be weird about having her on my hands, you know. And I can't think of anything less romantic, you know. Then okay, we're done. Let me go jump up and go wash off, you know.
Yeah. I will say,
write it in my books.
Yeah, and I will say that I think that if I were writing a YA novel that were going to involve sex and young people just entering into that world, I would probably be more thinking along those lines, because, you know, I think when you're writing books about mature women, it is sort of like a off page. They probably know about this. There is some value in, you know, the younger audience understanding like this is something you do have to think about, but yeah, it can be awkward. I agree with all of you guys. Let me see. Oh, And I think this was Renee earlier kind of hinted at this question, so I want to ask it. How much does your mood affect your ability to write sex? And then not necessarily just the kind of sex, but whether you can write sex or not. Let's start with Renee.
I know some people can write out of sequence. That doesn't work for me. So if I'm not in the mood, for lack of a better term, which is very rare, I don't write it. I'll go do something else. I'll start another novel. I'll write a short story. I'll read. I'll do something other than that scene, but that scene needs to happen organically in the book when it's supposed to happen. So there is a mood factor. Sometimes I can just put on my music and get there. Sometimes I just have to get up, walk away, maybe go have a cup of coffee, come back. Yeah, there are times when a sweet romance or a gentler romance can be a little easier to write. But I like going in the deep, dark places and pulling out all these wonderful little bits that people think about and don't want to admit. So those are fun.
They are fun. How about you, MJ?
I don't have to be in a specific space to write erotic. I can just write that. It comes out nice and easy. But when it comes to an actual love scene, then I got to be in the right frame of mind. I got to really be alone, put my thinking cap on, and try to maybe read the last few chapters again and try to get myself into where I can write an actual love scene. Those are much harder for me.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Deb? Have to be in the mood to write sex?
Not in the mood. I don't think well, I just start writing, and if I don't think the question is if I'm not in the mood to write. The question, the real question is how the writing affects my mood. I never have a problem getting in the mood to write a sex scene. I just start writing, and that gets you in the mood. Or when I typically sit down to write, when I first sit down to write, I go back and read what I've written most recently to get me back in the characters' heads. And so leading up to a sex scene, so if I do that, then I'm in the mood. I'm up with them again and where they are at that point in the story. If I start writing a sex scene and I'm thinking this is not turning me on, then I'm certainly not going to be turning on the reader. I'll delete it and start over. So it's not for me having to be in the mood. It's having the scene get me in the mood. I want it to affect me the way I want it to affect the reader.
Well, that is, I envy you, your ability to just sit down and write no matter what mood you're in. That's excellent. How about you, Brit? Are you able to do that? Or do you need to?
I certainly can.
Yeah.
I like as soon as we get off, we leave here. I'm in the. I just started a sex scene, so I was writing it during the last couple of panels I was on it, and so I'm excited because I get to go back to it, and I have been building up to this scene for a long time, so I already know. Okay, well, this has to happen, and then they're going to have sex. This has to happen, and then they're going to have sex. This has happened, so they're going to have sex. So in my head, I'm always building to that moment. So when it's time, I don't care where I'm at. I mean, if it's time to write sex, it is time to write sex, and I'm all in. So my mood, the only thing that ever like messed with me was all the politics from, you know, we all went through that. That was the only thing that ever kind of messed with me, and it worked its way into my story, so it worked. But for the most part, yeah, no, it's my job. I love it, and I can jump right into it. It's not a problem.
Dang, I envy you all. Another reader question. Have you ever written a book where a sex scene comes first and you build the world and characters around that sex scene or scenario? The answer is yes for me. How about you guys?
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Well, does anybody want to speak to how that feels? I know that when I got to around the 15,000 word mark in The Night Off and they hadn't even stopped having sex for the first time yet, that kind of was like, oh my God. There's multiple chapters of sex right in a row with nothing else right in the beginning of my story. You know, I mean, that's kind of an interesting challenge to set up for yourself in a way. You guys have any thoughts or I don't know, feelings about that you want to share, or challenges you've felt around that? Or do you like that? Is that almost easier?
I think that, well, for me, I'm always super aware that the first chapter, the first couple of chapters is so important to bring your reader into the story. If you haven't captured them by the end of the second chapter, then you might lose them because there's so much out there to read. So I really spend a lot of time on, like the book I'm writing now, I think I've rewritten that first chapter 8 times and changed how I decided to jump into the story. So I like to jump in to something that really sucks them right in. And I have more than one book that starts out with a sex scene of some sort. And and to the point where a couple of my friends tease me sometimes. They'll say, well, does this one start with a sex scene? And they don't always, but I think that if it's appropriate in the book, you need that first chapter needs to make the reader want to read more. And sometimes that's a sex scene. So you see, oh, this, I want to see what this character is going to do next. It may not be the love scene, but it might be a sex scene. So it's been on as you're flashing back and forth or whatever. But yeah, I think it's effective to jump right in there, let them know this is what the book's about, and maybe one's going to put the book down and say, well, this isn't the kind of book I want to read, and the other 9 out of the 10 are going to go, ooh, let's read some more.
Very true. How about you, Renee? You're nodding.
Body Language started out with a sex scene. It's an erotic romance, and I kept saying to myself, what can I write to really set the tone for this book? And I just kind of rolled and I went with it, and it worked. The main character, who has an interesting job as a waiter, is kept by clients at times. And she got home and was expected to perform, and she did. So that was how I started that book, because it was an integral part of her life and how she moved through it, and showed who she was.
And also a heck of a way to capture the reader in the first chapter.
Correct. Hopefully.
Yes. MJ or Brit, you guys like starting off with a bang, so to speak?
I do. I usually put sex in the first chapter. Usually. I can't think of an example when I didn't.
Yeah. Part of the reason I started writing in the first place was because I could get so impatient with stories where like the last scene was when they would finally have sex and then it would be over, because the sex should be part of the story. So yeah. I respect putting it in the first chapter. All right. So here's a good question. Although I don't know if it's entirely true, because it says you all write about 30-something characters, which for me with my last book is not entirely true. Although one of the characters was a 20-something, but the other ones were middle-aged. You know, there's a whole world out there for older ladies. Any thoughts about writing an older group? I very briefly have answered this question before for myself. I've actually always aged my characters however old I am when I'm writing it. So my characters have progressively been getting older as I go. And I anticipate in my next book will be about a middle-aged lady like myself. But there's obviously certain kinds of stories or scenarios that are going to work better for people who are in the beginning or mid-career, etc. What guides your guys' choices about what demographic you're writing? Let's start with MJ, because you're on screen.
Wow. I know I've written books about people in their 40s before. Broken Vows is about a nun and another woman, and they're in their 40s. In Heartscapes, there was a 60-something woman. So I don't really, it's really the story, the characters come to me and I'm going to write the characters as they are. And if they happen to be a little bit older, then I'll write that story. If they're not, then I won't. But it just, it's how the characters come to me. I don't usually write young people, but because like I could remember what that's like. But yeah, whatever the character is how I'm going to write them. I don't really discriminate against anybody. It's just however they come to me.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Deb? Have you?
Actually in my very first book, Bareback, besides the main characters who are young characters, one of them's parents who had split up when she was young, got back together in the book. They were secondary characters and they were older, I would say in their 50s. Kate was gray haired, and I did some, I can't remember if I wrote a specific sex scene with them, but wrote right up to it. I wrote a lot of affection between them and the fact that, you know, they recognized, they talked about the fact that neither one of them had 20-year-old bodies anymore, but they still found each other attractive enough to be in love. My second book, there were a secondary pair of characters that were in their 70s, and they found each other after having been teenage sweethearts and not seeing each other for 40, 50 years. They found each other again. And I'm pretty sure I didn't write anything explicit between them, but I wrote a lot about, in fact, the assisted living place they were living in, the administrator was complaining that, that they were being so sexual with each other that it was infecting the other residents, and they had to break up a fight between two old men that were fighting over a bottle of Viagra. You know, I haven't had main characters that were beyond in their 40s, but yeah, I think you know, my parents right up until, you know, they were physically unable, were affectionate with each other. And you know, it's I think it's doable. You know, it doesn't, maybe the younger audience may not think it's sexy, but you know, we're still sexy at this age.
Damn right.
Yeah.
Damn right. More experience, we know more, don't we, Renee?
All that research counts for something.
There you go.
I always have preferred older women, so there's something to be said for that. Brit, did you have anything to add?
I'm gonna win this. I'm gonna win this question hands down. My book that's coming out in January, I have a character is 100 and the other character is 96.
You won.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there's the freedom. Yes.
Well, there's also a couple 20-year-olds in the story too, but I'm just saying that I win because I have it's like the story is driven by a 100-year-old and a 96-year-old. And so
Cool.
But
That's
usually I'm
awesome.
with MJ on that. The character comes to me and it's who they are and how they are. And I think, you know, if you write about characters in the 30s, you're going to pull people who are younger into your reading. And then you're also going to pull people who remember when they were in their 30s. And so I think I don't see a fault with it. I feel like, yes, there does need to be some representation. And I do have some secondary characters who are older in my novels. But I think in the 30s, you're kind of set, you know, you're set in your life, you know what you want sexually, you're doing well, you know, you're trying to find your person, I think. And so I like writing about it because I think a lot of times you find your person in your 30s. And so most of my characters are in the 30s.
To me. Does anyone have anything else to say about that? Or should I move on to the next question? I can't remember if anybody looked like they wanted to talk more. This is a good question from Tiffany Arrington. Do any of your characters struggle to reach climax? And if not, why not? Because that is not exactly an uncommon thing for women. And I do think that's a really good question. I know I've had characters with different levels of sexual dysfunction or, you know, just trust issues or physical comfort, you know, body issues. I don't know if I've ever specifically written about a character who had trouble orgasming. Have any of you thought about that, written about that? Think it would be interesting to write about that? MJ, we'll start with you
I think
again.
it'd be very interesting to write about that. I don't think I have. I've written body issues before, that kind of thing, but I can't really think of any time that my super butch woman hasn't been super capable of taking care of her femme person. So, but that sounds interesting to write about. It might be something to include. Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was feeling about that question.
Yeah.
Look at my little idea file for the future. Renee, what do you think? Is that something you would love to write about?
I think I've had moments in a book or two that the moment just wasn't right, and both characters kind of agreed with that, you know, oh, maybe we shouldn't do this kind of thing. Failure to climax, no. If they've gotten that far, I've let them enjoy it. Just saying. Although it might be worth visiting if the story is supportive of that kind of a setting. So far mine have not been. So
fair enough. What do you think, Deb or Brit? Brit, you are eager to speak.
I'm so excited about this question. I actually, in my book, Listen, I have a character who, when she and her love interest actually hook up for the first time, she's not comfortable. And so she stops the character and she's just like, you know, can we just kind of rely on heavy petting? I'm not really at that stage yet. And it's, you know, it's a real sweet, tender moment because, you know, the character's not ready, but yet the other character she's already exploded and she's had her orgasm. And so the other character is just like, she's a virgin. And so she's not ready for it. She's a late bloomer. And, but yeah, I mean, I think it's important because it's true that not every experience is going to be like fireworks and you're going to get it right. And people stumble and bumble along, especially the first time with somebody. You're not going to know exactly what they like or how they like it unless there's like a huge, you know, open communication. And sometimes that doesn't happen the first time. But I mean, I think it's important, but at the same time, it's also romance. And everybody likes the smoothness of romance and how, you know, you just kind of go with the characters and you're done with the scene. You're like, that was so great. That was beautiful. That felt wonderful. And that's why you read the books. You know, there's realism, but there's also the fantasy and the romance of them too.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that most people read these books for the escapism and the fantasy, not necessarily for the real life struggles, reminders of real life struggles or whatever. So I like this question. What kind of music do you play while writing your sex scene, if you listen to music at all? And does each book have its own music? And I'm going to just start everybody off by saying that the only song I ever had that really correlated closely with anything I was writing was when I was writing The Night Off, I was listening to S&M by Rihanna a lot on loop. So Every time you hear that song, think of the night off, because I do. Anybody else like to write music? And do you have special music for sex scenes?
Yeah, I play an album over and over and over again once I find the one that I am working with that works for me. And I'm sure that everybody in the household is sick of hearing it by the time I'm done, but I don't really care.
The process. Do what you gotta do.
That's right.
How about you, Deb? Do you like to listen to music when you write?
I don't listen. I don't listen to music that much, and because if I'm listening to something, it's usually an audiobook. Words are my music, and so I don't usually. I've heard songs before that inspire ideas for books, for sure. And when I wrote my book, it just came out, Unbridled. I had listened to one particular bluesy artist that I really liked, and I mentioned some of her song titles in that book. But so, if people wanted to go back and wanted to listen to that, because I thought that set the mood for the scene and the story, but I typically don't listen to music. And I don't watch television that much because I'm usually busy writing. So my house is pretty quiet, except for the barking of dogs.
The pitter patter of terrier feet.
Yes.
All right, I know we're getting close to the end here. Does anybody else have any good music tips? Or MJ?
I just want to say that the only I don't listen to music when I write. The only time I enjoyed having music on when I was writing is when my son lived with us, and he would make his own music, so he'd be in there DJing, which meant I knew it was safe for me to go ahead and write sex scenes because he wasn't going to walk out and bother me.
That's pretty good. Yeah. I have a son myself, and I really like to write sex scenes when he's nowhere near me. So I get that.
Yeah, I don't listen to music because I'll sing it in my head. And I have to stay focused on the story. So I have the TV on almost 24/7, and that keeps that part of my brain busy so that I can concentrate on writing. Because if I can't listen to music during the night, like to go to sleep, it's just because my brain's constantly singing and trying to count the beats. And if I don't know the song, so I can't do music and write at the same time. But I love music, but I can't listen to it when I write.
Yeah, I get it. I can be that way. Well, thank you guys. That was a really nice chat. Enjoyed it very much, and liked learning all about you and how you guys are rock stars. Good job.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.